All right, we are live. We're going to begin the live with the pixelated Alexander, and then we'll, in about like 10 minutes, we'll get to the crystal clear. Alexander, as always, this has become tradition now for YouTube to pixelate you in the beginning and then to clear you up as we go along. Anyway, Alexander, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. I mean, I wonder whether YouTube's philosophy is, don't look at the man behind the curtain. They don't want me to. Well, I'm not the Wizard of Oz, at least. But anyway, there it is. I mean, it's very weird. It's very odd that this happens every time that we start this. But it does, as you rightly said, it does clear up. Then in the meantime, just apologies. And this isn't really anything to do with us or indeed, it seems any of the technologies that we use, because we use different people. We use StreamYard, sometimes we use Riverside, and the problem is always the same as far as I can tell.
Anyway, what can we do? This is an impromptu live, everybody. We just said it's been a while since we've connected. We'll do a proper live on Friday, our usual Friday live. But we just wanted to kind of just reconnect with everybody, and we didn't get to do a live last week, so we just wanted to drop in and say hello and talk about some news for about an hour. You've got about an hour, Alexander, before you have to run off. So really, we there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of interesting stuff. But I'll jump into the live stream and pick out some topics that people may be interested in. I'll go to our locals page as well, the Duran.locals.com, and see what topics people may want us to talk about. Just for an hour, once again, reconnect with everybody, say a quick hello, and let me just say a quick hello, Alexander, to everybody in Singapore, South Florida, Denmark, London, Sydney, Australia, Russia, South Africa, where else? Denmark, Serbia, Greece, Kefalonia, Gothenburg, where else? Malaysia, Netherlands, Sydney, from all over, Serbia. Great to have everybody here. I will be in Serbia, Alexander, tomorrow, actually. So to everyone in Serbia, I will say hello to you guys from Belgrade as well. South Wales, Hungary, Portugal, England. Alexander, topic. What's on your mind, real quick, and then I'll just jump into the live stream as well as locals.
Well, I have to say, I mean, always we're constrained about saying this, but it seems to me the political situation in the US is changing now rapidly, and we see that the administration, the wheels, it seems to me, are well and truly coming off. We've had a whole series of opinion polls which point to growing problems, and they are, in my opinion, connected to problems in the economy more than anything else. I mean, there's been all kinds of fiascos in foreign policy. We've talked about that at great length on our channel and on my own channel. And we've had all kinds of other problems on the border and all the rest. But, let's just dial back at the start of this year. I mean, the economy seemed to be forging ahead on all cylinders. Everybody, including myself, by the way, we're talking about an economic boom this year. And it all seems to be coming unstuck. We see surging energy prices. We see energy shortages in Europe. We see energy shortages in China too, by the way. We see all kinds of mounting problems at all levels, higher prices, talk of interest rate increases, all of these sort of things. And I think this has all worked into a feeling of malaise, a sense that the administration doesn't have a grip on the situation. Well, we've talked about that often. And that both at the level of foreign policy and at the level of domestic policy, things are not really fully under control or going according to plan. And I think the fiasco we saw in Afghanistan plays directly into that. And the point is that whilst all this is going on, we see the other side, if I can put it like that, the Chinese and the Russians, purposefully making their moves. They've now brought Iran into their geopolitical system. The Russians are hosting the foreign minister of Vietnam in Moscow as we're talking, and he came following a really interesting discussion between Putin and the Vietnamese president. This is the country that Kamala Harris was trying to win over. The Vietnamese have said after that, we don't really want to have much to do with this. We want to make friends with the other side. So it's quite interesting to see. So, I mean, we have this sense of malaise intensifying on the one side. We have purposeful action on the other, which is not to say that there aren't also lots of problems on the other side too, with Evergrande, with the energy shortages in China, with power cutouts in northern China, all that going on. So all sorts of things going on in the world as part of what I suspect, by the way, is the final end of globalization. We see the division of the world taking place, and we see the movement of goods and materials is beginning to end. So, there's all kinds of things we can talk about there, and about the way in which some people are still trying to push this thing forward and the controls, but we see the underlying tectonic shifts taking place. Anyway, that's me.
The end of globalization. So that would explain the push for more repression and for more tyranny, I guess.
Absolutely.
The last throws. The last throws.
The two are directly connected. I mean, the attempt to set up a globalized system is disintegrating. The world is dividing into two power blocks, and the economy is the economic links, the supply chains, all of that are being torn asunder. And without that, the economic part of globalization doesn't work. But at the same time, the people who are ideologically invested in the project are not prepared to give up on it, and they're intensifying. And we will see both things going on at the same time.
Okay. Alexander, let's do some questions that we have right here. Thank you, Brian, for your super chat. Really appreciated. From our last live stream, Heyman dropped in a super chat right when we cut out. And I want to just read Heyman's super chat. And if you want to comment on it, it has to do with Canada. Liberals in Canada are the model for the globalists.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so true. I mean, that's exactly right. That is exactly what they're all about. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was
comment. His comment is spot on, and I have really nothing to add.
Yeah. Mark Hewitt says, any chance of doing a program on the French retreat in the Sahel and how the loss of the Francophone Africa will affect the French economy? That is an interesting topic.
Fascinating topic. Very interesting. Very, very interesting topic, and definitely one we should do. It's also got a geopolitical dimension, because not only is France pulling out of the Sahel, but of course, as the French pull out, the Russians appear to be moving in. But the really extraordinary thing is a furious row between Mali and France, with the Malians saying the French have betrayed them and let them down, and furious exchange apparently between Lavrov and Josep Borrell, the absolutely fatuous EU high representative for foreign policy. And apparently Borrell told Lavrov, stay out of Africa, that's our patch, it's not yours. And Lavrov said, this isn't the world of European colonies, and basically take a running jump. I'm sure he used rather more diplomatic words than that, but apparently it was an absolute row between the two men just over that very topic. So let's definitely do it. That's a very good issue to talk about, and let's certainly look into it.
Yeah, Carol from Locals says, from the Locals live chat says, hello, everybody. Sounds good. The end of globalization. It does sound good. Cern says 2017 in Kyoto.
Be careful when you say that, because of course, globalization, I agree. In the long term, overall, it is a good thing. But before it finally ends, before this project is finally buried, we're going to see a major push from its advocates, and they're not going to be happy.
Turbulence, a lot of turbulence.
A lot of turbulence along the way. But, I mean, I agree with you, but do bear that in mind.
Yeah, and Cern says, 2017 in Kyoto, Japan. You are right, Alexander. The world is changing for the better. It's hard to see that things are changing, given how terrible things are, but... let's see. Hopefully you're right, Alexander. And there is going to be a lot of turbulence along the way. But let's see. Let's see how things turn out. Alexander, I'm going into the live stream as well and seeing what people are talking about. 98% jab rate is what Biden is saying after his booster. Why 98, Alexander? Why not 120%? Why stop at 98? Biden is such an underachiever, isn't he?
Yeah, no, well, absolutely. Well, this is the point, because of course he sold himself, you see, as the person who was going to solve this problem. He was going to do so much better than his predecessor, the bad orange man did. And things, even that hasn't turned out quite as he'd anticipated. So, of course, he's now doing what people always do. People like that always do. I mean, this is very much a feature of weak leaders, weak personalities. When it doesn't work out exactly as they want, they double down and they triple down. And instead of becoming more realistic about their targets, they make their targets less realistic. and at the same time, they become increasingly compulsive and tough, or try to be tough, in the way in which they enforce these increasingly unrealistic targets. So when I talked about turbulence, well, there's an example.
Yeah. Let's see. Mike says globalists usually push hard, then back off for a while and let the frogs get comfy again. Boiling the frogs. Yeah.
Oh, well, I agree with that. But I mean, as I said, I think the movement in the tectonic shifts are now becoming too great, even for that kind of strategy to really work. The only place where it seems to me globalization is still on the march is actually within Europe itself, in some ways the heartland area of it, where it was probably all really cooked up. And we see a major push now in Europe. We see events in the Balkans. We see pressure on Poland. We see more pressure, of course, on Hungary. We see all sorts of things going on there. And I mean, and of course, we've just had news about the steps that YouTube has taken with RT channels.
Yeah,
we need to be very careful about discussing that, I'm afraid. And perhaps we shouldn't, but not on YouTube. But anyway, but I mean, we see all sorts of things going on there.
Yeah, well, I think it could be discussed on YouTube. I don't see a reason.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay. Yeah,
I've actually done a pretty long video that which I may put up.
Really?
I don't know. After listening to you, I don't know. Should I publish that video? But no, I mean, it's
on locals. Everybody should come to locals and watch it there, because and sign up and become a member, and even an active member, and you'll see all of our videos there, completely undiluted and whatever. But I leave that to your judgment, Alex.
Yeah.
You're closer to the feel of these people than I am, straightforwardly.
Yeah, well, this was expected, I think.
Absolutely.
The fracturing of the internet and the fracturing of big tech. It's bound to happen. The minute you stop being a platform and you start being a publisher, and you start putting together all these rules across all these different rules across so many different countries. Yeah, it's going to happen. You're going to start getting banned and throttled down, and their services are not going to be available in certain countries, and all hell breaks loose. The minute you deplatform the president of the United States, Twitter, you blew up. You blew up the internet. Period.
Absolutely. Anyway, the timing of this move, I will say, is very interesting. It comes directly after the German elections, and and it suggests sensitivity about the formation of the German government. The new German government was going to be a protracted affair. So that's it's the timing is very interesting indeed.
Yeah. Russia is threatening to ban YT. Yeah. I mean, it's not going to stop at Russia or YT. It'll happen across country, big tech platform across big tech platform. We'll get a lot more bans and a lot more rows and disputes going. Expected. Let's see here. Jeff says, if globalization is ending, will we divide into two blocks or a multipolar world? And will we not be able to travel freely between blocks? I hope not. I want to visit Moscow and Beijing again. That is Jeff. I hope not as well. We can travel. But can I just say something, Alexander? Traveling has become extremely difficult from one block to another already. It has already become extremely difficult.
I completely agree with that, and I'm afraid there will be problems with travel. It won't be quite as straightforward as it was. Having said that, we're not going to go back to the world of the 1950s, when it was extremely difficult for people to move and to travel and to visit places. And of course, if you were Soviets, you couldn't travel to the West, except in very, very limited and restricted ways. But we're not returning to that sort of world. So it will still be possible to travel to Moscow. It will still be possible to travel to Beijing. their citizens will still be able to travel to our countries, but the restrictions will become greater. And as to whether it'll be a bipolar system or a multipolar system, at the moment, it's evolving into a system of a bipolar system. The United States and the West versus China, Russia, and the Eurasian bloc. But eventually, I anticipate that's going to break down, because there isn't the ideological coherence within the two blocs that we saw during the Cold War, and which solidified the blocs and meant that everybody around the world had to make an ideological decision which side or the other they supported. This is more straightforward, old-fashioned, great power competition, and that ultimately points to multipolarity rather than to a bipolar system. But we have to go through bipolar period in order to get there first.
Yeah, Siren says, here in Japan, we are accustomed to typhoons so big that they have an arm in Alaska and another in Australia. So some turbulence will be survived. The sun shines on the other side. Well said. And Evgeny says, Japan has got a new prime minister. The candidate is a former foreign minister, not a hardline China hawk. Will he remain in his position for long?
Well, very good question. I mean, Japanese politics can be quite unstable. I mean, the long reign of Abe as Prime Minister of Japan was an anomaly. Usually, Japanese leaders, prime ministers, come and go very fast, even though the Liberal Party in Japan remains overwhelmingly the dominant party. I think that this might actually be a change for real. I agree. He does seem, from what I've heard, to be less of a China hawk than some of the others. And bear in mind, Japan and China are very, very close economic partners. So, there are things that draw these two countries together as well as which push them apart. And I think that Japan, there must be some people in Japan who are looking at the way things are going and who are looking at what the situation is in Washington. And they say to themselves, do we really want to be aligned so closely with the United States, especially this United States, against China at this particular time? Maybe an independent foreign policy for us, maybe some sort of conciliatory moves towards China are what we should do. I want to stress, I don't mean that Japan is going to go full over to the other side, that it's going to somehow align with China against the United States. That's absolutely not going to happen. Nobody should expect that. But perhaps a little less tension in the relationship we might actually see.
Yeah, Paula says, in Holland, we are fighting against the mandatory QR code, which they're trying to force on us. Please stand with us. Paula, we stand with you. We do videos on what's going on with the protests in Amsterdam, as well as France, which continues. Israel had big protests against the boosters, really big protests. This goes in line with what we said at the beginning of the broadcast, Alexander. There is going to be a lot of turbulence along the way in the next 3 to 6 months.
Yes, absolutely. 3 to 6 months. Well, absolutely. And definitely the next 3 to 6 months. But, expect more even beyond that. I mean, this isn't, we can't go from one system, one type of system, and one overriding ideology. I mean, people need to understand that globalization is an ideology. I mean, this is a fact which people don't, I think, quite understand. It's not just a trading system. Sometimes they want you to think that, but there is a whole ideology of globalization. And with globalization goes homogenization. We all have to be the same as each other, essentially. So we're not going to go from that to something different easily. There's going to be a lot of instability and turbulence, and it's not just going to last 3 to 6 months. It's going to take longer than that. And as I said, the epicenter, which is Europe, it's going to take longer still, I'm afraid.
Yeah, Ralph says that Israel is getting used like a pink cushion. I think they're on like their 3rd or 4th booster, and they've had enough. It looks like the people in Israel, the protests in Tel Aviv were pretty large, and it looks like they've had enough, and rightly so. You just can't come out with a policy and just say every 3 months you're going to have to get boosted up. But Darth says you two have often said that you can't see any other currency take over the USD's role as world reserve currency when it fails. What if after the fall of the USD, there are no world reserve currencies at all?
No, there are always, one can never know for certain what will happen, but there will always be something. I mean, the idea that, if you don't have the USD and the USD falls, people are not going to be able to trade and carry on with their lives and do business with each other. I mean, that's unreal. That's a fantastic idea. The USD, by the way, did serve a genuine purpose. I mean, let's not badmouth it all the time. I mean, it was for a long, long time the glue that kept international trade going. If you, remember the halcyon days of the 60s, 70s, and even the 50s, you will know that it played an absolutely central role in those days of stabilizing at least the Western economy, building it around the USD. And it did play a very important role in world trade. That's already diminishing, and other things will take its place. I mean, it may be cryptocurrencies, it may be digital currencies, it may be things we aren't even really familiar with at the moment, but something will come. And my own guess is, by the way, that with blockchain technologies now coming to the fore increasingly, and I'm not a technologically minded person, but I think anyway, the days when we have to have a single reserve currency are probably ending.
Well, the more dangerous part is not so much the world currency for me on an individual level. It's the fact that the IMF came out with a document the other day, Alexander, and they said that guidelines for banks to start deciding whether to open up accounts or to give loans should not only be based on credit history and your past financial history, but should now take into account your social media history as well. The IMF is just bad news. That is just a bad news idea.
Yeah. Absolutely, and no question about that. It's a terrible idea, actually. That's an astonishing idea.
That's their guidelines. That's what they recommend. Anyway, it's scary stuff, but it won't work. It won't work.
It won't work. And as I said, and as the new technological world that we're starting to see is going to cause problems to the banking system, which I don't think the banks are really alive to at the moment. I don't think they really grasp what that's all going to mean. But, as I said, I'm not a technologically minded person anyway. And I don't want to anticipate what might happen without really understanding what it might be. But I agree, by the way. I mean, it's recommendations like that which are much more worrying than what will happen to the USD.
Yeah. And let me just see what some people are saying at locals here. Japan is now open to people who have taken the jab, with jab recognized by the Japanese government. That's from CERN. And CERN says that everybody in Japan has great hopes with the new prime minister. Japan will slowly turn from the U.S. towards China, but it will still take some time. A further downturn in the U.S. will hasten this. Well, Jeff says, great point on ideology of globalization, Alexander.
Well, thank you very much. And a very interesting points about Japan. Japan is a country we really need to engage with because it's so important. It's so potentially, it is so powerful. I mean, it's had a rather rough, well, not exactly rough. It's had an odd 30 years where it's, to all intents and purposes, its economy seems to have been at a standstill, but it retains in tremendous industrial and technological strengths, and should not be underestimated. And if Japan turns in a certain direction, then of course that's going to make big shifts happen in the Pacific as well.
Yeah. Evgeny says, I would prefer the euro replace the USD as the world's reserve currency. And CERN says China is moving very fast to blockchain electronic payment systems, including international transactions.
Absolutely. I know they are, and that's entirely correct. By the way, we're talking about blockchain. I mean, whatever you may think about it, but this electronic voting system that took place in Moscow, which, by the way, I'm not in favor of. I think one should go ahead with and stick with in-person voting, which has always worked. I don't see why that has to be changed. But anyway, that electronic voting system was apparently based on blockchain technologies. So, things seem to be moving forward on every front. Yeah.
Yeah. Deville says, when are we ditching YT? We don't want to ditch. We want to broadcast to as many places as we can. So, but our point on all of that is stick to being a platform and not a publisher. And then, we won't see restrictions and we won't see stuff like what's happening between Russia and Germany. If you just stick to being a platform and not a publisher, then I think, services like YT and whatever other social media services are out there will thrive. If they want to be publishers, then, we're going to get a lot of what's happening between Germany and Russia replicated to many different countries and many different situations.
Yes, I completely agree.
Yeah. Let's see. Let me see what else we have here. We have some super chats as well. From Irish Partisan says, what is your take on the latest Serbia-Kosovo tensions? We have a video coming out today on that. But Alexander, real quick.
Well, I mean, it's a very disturbing and alarming situation. And my overall take of it, and our overall take of it, is that it is part of a pattern of growing pressure on Serbia. There's an attempt to provoke Serbia by these steps which have been taken from Kosovo, which to be the authorities in Kosovo, which to be absolutely clear are completely wrong and illegitimate. I mean, there's a big question mark over the legitimacy of the Kosovo authorities anyway, which we discussed fully in our program, and we make our own views about that known. But it's clearly part of this campaign of pressure that's been building up on Serbia in the Balkans over the last year. We saw the protests in Montenegro a short time ago, which were clearly directed at severing the links between Montenegro and Serbia and undermining the new Montenegro government. We've seen other pressures on Serbia from all kinds of directions. And this is absolutely part of that pattern. There are some people who see Serbia as an obstacle to the expansion of NATO and the EU across the entire Balkans, and indeed to every country in Europe apart from Belarus and Russia. And that's why there is now a sustained attack on Serbia, and that's what this is all about.
Yeah, I mean, it is the piece on the chessboard that they have to take, right? Is Serbia. They have to take Serbia, and then they can focus, Alexander, on I would imagine Belarus would be their next focus if they manage to turn Serbia. That would be the next natural choice. And that would explain why you have Lukashenko and Putin coordinating now in their statements, don't you think?
All the time, and absolutely, and declaring red lines and setting up red lines for Ukraine and conducting massive exercises in military exercises on their western borders. All of this is part of the same moves, and what's going on in the Balkans is part of that. I mean, all of these things are connected. And as we also discussed in that program, which is just going to appear shortly, there are actually Russian military people now in Serbia itself holding consultations with the Serbian military. That doesn't mean that military action is necessarily coming, but it is a way both for the Russians to exercise some control over the situation, but also obviously to signal support for Serbia.
Yes, and we know about Russia and Germany and YouTube. I did a video on that. I'll see if I put it up on YouTube or just locals. Let me go through it. It's one of my longer videos. I don't really do long videos, but there was a lot to get through on that one on a technical social media standpoint. But we'll see. We'll cover that as much as we can. Most likely, definitely on locals, and I'll see if I get up on YouTube. Alexander, just to follow up on Serbia, Russia, NATO, and Kosovo, there is the second part of the video that we're putting up with regards to Serbia. It's going to be a two-parter. The second part has to deal with Hungary and Ukraine. Do you want to talk about Nord Stream 2, energy, Hungary and Ukraine for just a couple of minutes as I go through some more comments from the live stream?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Because this argument between Hungary and Ukraine, and this decision by Hungary to call in the Ukrainian ambassador and to warn him against interfering in Hungarian internal affairs, is also part of something else, because of course we've now seen a rise in tensions in Ukraine itself. There's again been more fighting in the eastern regions of Ukraine. The Ukrainian commander-in-chief, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian army, has apparently authorized Ukrainian forces to fire back at the people in the Donbass. And there's also been statements which I've seen published, by the way, in the British media, that a war between Ukraine and Russia is coming. So all of these tensions are being whipped up. And of course, this is partly connected to Nord Stream 2, because of course, Nord Stream 2 puts Ukraine in an extremely difficult position, one which it has brought, it must be said, on itself. And of course, the Ukrainians are extremely upset and very angry that Nord Stream 2 has been built, that their position as a transit state is now coming to an end. And they're trying to put pressure through Europe on various countries not to buy gas, except if it comes via Ukraine. And of course, Hungary is now buying gas directly from Gazprom, and it's going to circumvent Ukraine. I presume it's going to come via the Turk Stream pipeline, but I'm not absolutely sure. And we also see attempts to slow down the certification of Nord Stream 2. And I personally wonder whether these latest moves that we've seen with RT's YouTube channels might be in some way connected to that also, that there's another renewed attempt by some people in the Commission to block or to stop Nord Stream 2 from operating properly, and that this is partly going to be a topic in the construction of the new German government. My own view is that all of these projects are going to fail. I think Nord Stream 2 is built. I think it's inconceivable the Germans will not want to see gas flow through Nord Stream 2. I think if they do that, if the political class in Berlin refuses to go along that way, they will come under enormous pressure from the German business community, which is extremely powerful in Germany. And I don't think that's going to happen. So, all of these things are connected with each other. But we also see, and that's separate from this issue of gas and energy supplies, this renewed push against Hungary, the attempt to patch together a united opposition against Orban in the pending elections. We see growing pressure on Poland. We see an attempt, which is linked to what we see in Serbia, by the EU Centre to try to bring all of these errant countries, Serbia, Poland, Hungary, and the rest, into line. And that's going to intensify over the next few weeks and months.
Alexander, real quick, our symbol is the double-headed eagle, right? And people are looking at China and the Pacific with good reason, and we should pay attention to there. But we need to also be looking towards what's going on in Central Europe and in Europe in general. As everyone is focusing on China and Taiwan, in the beginning of the live stream, we had a lot of questions about Japan as well and China. All of a sudden, literally within the past week, we have Hungary and Ukraine. We have Russia and Belarus coming out with statements. We have Serbia and Kosovo over stuff that at first would seem very trivial, like what's going on in Kosovo with a license plate issue. All of a sudden, the authorities in Kosovo come up with this license plate thing, and bam, you have tensions springing up. Hungary goes to make a decision on its energy policy, and bam, you have issues with Hungary and Ukraine, and all of this once again could be perceived as a way to antagonize Russia and to bait Russia into some sort of conflict. So we always need to be aware, as we're looking at Asia and the Pacific, we need to be very aware that the neocons have an obsession with conquering Europe, with taking over Serbia, moving Belarus into their camp, and eventually getting that war with Russia or getting into Russia. They will never give that up. And here they are again. Every 3 to 6 months, here we go again with some more stuff happening.
Absolutely. And I would add, and I've just done a long program about this, which you probably can find both on YouTube and on Locals, which is that Putin has been holding a whole series of very high-level meetings over the last few days. They're still continuing. There was another meeting today, by the way, in which they're clearly working towards developing some kind of strategic plan for Russia in anticipation of this increased pressure that we've been hearing about. And it's also the case that the former Russian president, Mr. Medvedev, who was, of course, now the deputy chair of the Russian Security Council, has been making all sorts of comments about US attempts or Western attempts to interfere in the recent Russian parliamentary elections. And we see renewed pressure on Russia with all sorts of talk about sanctions, banning Americans from buying Russian sovereign debt, even on the secondary, market, and sanctions against every conceivable Russian official or businessman you've ever heard of now pending. So, I mean, people like Roman Abramovich, who basically lives in Britain most of the time, as far as I can see, he's
Chelsea
now
owner.
on the same. Absolutely. I mean, everybody. Absolutely. Yeah, no, everybody. Exactly. Chelsea owner. Exactly. Practically everybody now seems to be on the sanctions list, and officials like people in middle-ranking positions in Russian economics ministries who no connection with foreign or security policy. They also seem to be now on sanctions lists. So there is a kind of, I'm going to say, there's a kind of frenetic, even demented quality to some of this now, as if you failed and failed and failed again. So you're going to try even more. You're going to try and push even harder, silence any doubters, crack down even more. And of course, it's not going to succeed. It's going to create enormous tensions in its wake.
Yeah. Let's see. Putin. These guys are allied with Russia. We haven't heard that one before. All right. Thank you, Mike, for that comment. Let's see here. Zemmour. Here's a question about Zemmour in France. What do you make of Zemmour's rise in France? Could it split Le Pen's votes and prevent her from even reaching the second round? Le Pen may have done damage to herself, and she may not even need the help of Zemmour.
I was going to say, I think what has happened in the case of Le Pen is that by trying to make herself a more acceptable person to the French establishment, she's opened a space for other people who argue her original message, if you like, to come to the fore. And I think she's lost it. I have to say this. I mean, I don't personally expect any longer to see President Le Pen, because I think she diluted her own brand to the point that just not enough people are going to vote for it. And I think that this situation that we're seeing is entirely a product of that.
Yeah, Zemmour has taken a harder stance than Le Pen, and hence taking a lot of her voters. That is what Jay Perez said. Yeah, and she did it to herself. She left that lane open. She tried to switch lanes, and she left the lane where she was doing well. She left that open. Alexander, you are now clear again. Sorry. Go ahead, Alexander.
Well, there it is. I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, that's exactly what happened. I mean, she moved towards the center, and then thereby she lost definition. The extraordinary thing is she did that at precisely the moment when French opinion was actually starting to shift in her direction. It's a very weird thing to do. It shows, to my mind, that she doesn't have that feel for, the popular currents. A really successful politician, one who really is going to make big changes, actually needs. Because, as I said, she shifted precisely at the moment when she didn't need to. I mean, she had in Macron a president who is overweeningly dominant and at the same time massively unpopular. So he's not going to move or shift aside. He's not going to do an Hollande and pack his bags and say I'm going and leave the space open for someone else, because that's not Macron's style. And so that opened a good opportunity for someone like Le Pen to say, look, it's either me or Macron. You've seen what Macron is. I stand clearly for these. I stand for France, for sovereignty for France, for all of these kind of things for France. And these are my policies, and you know what my policies are. They are policies that France has followed before and have worked well for France. Instead of doing that, she shifted towards the center and did that at precisely the wrong moment, and she's now paying the price.
Yeah, let's we'll go for like another 10-15 minutes, Alexander. Is that cool?
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. All right, we'll go for another 10-15 minutes. Remember, we're going to do a normal live on Friday. Let's get to some more comments on let's jump over to locals here. You have Shiny Shoes saying Japan was deliberately hobbled in the 1990s using a massive debt trap set up by the central banking cartel. Cheap credit blasted Tokyo real estate prices to the sky before imploding, leaving the economy shouldering a massive debt and mortgage overhang. And Searn, says Alexander, Searn says the Bank of China is moving very carefully with electronic payments. Absolutely no mistakes can be allowed. Can recommend China's Digital Currency Revolution Cashless by Richard Duran from 2021.
I think both comments are absolutely spot on and entirely right. I would also add, by the way, and this is something which I haven't talked about before, but I've noticed a whole series of articles appearing in the Chinese media at the moment saying, let us not make the kind of mistakes Japan made in the 1980s and 1990s, because Japan was on a very strong path until they started making all those shifts and changes in policy, and it went wrong for Japan, and if we do the same thing, it'll be bad for China too. So I think both points are spot on, and it's actually striking to see how the Chinese seem to be picking up on this themselves and talking about this. Whatever you may think of the Chinese government, and I have a lot of things I could say about the Chinese government, some of them very critical, but it is focused and it is also extremely careful in assessing what goes on in the world. They clearly have some very powerful analytical centers working for them and able to provide them with lots of data and lots of information and lots of very, very grounded analysis. So that's a thing to bear in mind.
All right. Alex Eternal says there's instability literally everywhere in the world. Europe's old money tries everything to secure its future. Meanwhile, the US, the politicians are in their own bubble. They only care about power, and they're trying to keep that power.
First of all, you're right. And secondly, you're very astute to mention old money, because as I've repeatedly pointed out, the whole thing with globalization, all of these ideas actually started with people who are very much identified with Europe's old money. I mean, Davos, I don't want to go on about Davos. Some people are fixated with Davos. Davos is it's a place where people meet. But if you look at the people who originally set up the World Economic Forum, they are European old money. They are, the old families that have, accumulated the great wealth in Europe for many centuries. And they all go skiing in Switzerland in winter, and they all met together and they came up with a lot of these ideas and plans at that time. So that's where globalization sprung from them.
Yeah. Alexandre says, do you guys plan on doing Brazil's current crazy situation? Well, also, what about AMLO and his interesting brigade of rebels of leaders from SA? I guess, Alexandre, do you mean Obrador as a leader in South America with SA? Just let me know in the chat. But the first part of the question, Brazil, Alexander?
We've already touched on this in the program, and I'm sure we're going to do an awful lot more in Brazil. I mean, Brazil is another country it's hugely important. I mean, you only have to look at the size of it and its enormous potential and its real abilities. And we'll see whether, obviously this is going to be an absolutely seminal election. And, I've been reading again in all the usual places, written by all the usual people, the same stories about how democracy in Brazil is under threat, how there's going to be a coup there, how the president is planning or scheming to cling on to power and to abolish elections and all that kind of thing. In my opinion, a lot of it is just, frankly, twisting fairly typical election rhetoric to make it look all very sinister and very dangerous, which I don't believe. I think there's any risk of a coup or that kind of a crisis in Brazil. The military certainly don't seem to be in on that kind of idea, and without the military, how can it happen? So, I mean, I think this is all an absurd idea, but Brazil is really important, and the very fact that they are talking about this, they're making all these sort of scare stories about Brazil, basically shows you how important Brazil is. So definitely we will be doing a lot more programs about Brazil. About Mexico, I confess I know much less. So,
well, Obrador is, okay, we've talked many times about how South America has been lurching very much left, and it seems that it's a very radical type of left as well. But Obrador is interesting in that he's left, but he's not. It doesn't seem that he's radical. It seems like he's more grounded. I mean, that's just the hunch that I get from him. Well, I don't know if you agree.
Well, he again, I stress again, I'm perhaps not as familiar with him as I ought to be, really. And Mexico, by the way, is a fascinating country with a tremendous culture and history and lots of things to talk about in Mexico. But I mean, he doesn't fit. He doesn't tick all the boxes. I mean, his approach, for example, to the pandemic is not the sort of Biden approach to the pandemic, just as one example. So maybe he is different. He certainly seems a more uncomfortable fit for, the sort of left world that we see today, whose center seems to be, if I have to be straightforward about it, Southern California. That's at least my perspective on this. So, but before I really discuss Obrador and Mexico, I'd like to know an awful lot more about what's actually going on there and read some of the things that people there are saying and get more of a feel for what's going on.
Yeah. A couple more minutes, Alexander, and we'll wind it down. Yeah. All right. Everybody hit that like, everybody, as we wind this down. Let's get this video out there. And please join us once again on Friday, where we will do a proper live stream. Let me see. Let's see. Zelensky. What are your thoughts on how Zelensky's doing, Alexander?
Well, he's doing terribly badly, and he's going from bad to worse, as far as I can see. I mean, Ukraine is an awful mess. He's even got people like Poroshenko saying that he's a would-be dictator, which I have to say, coming from Poroshenko is a little bit much, but there we go. I mean, my impression is Zelensky is caught between so many, a giant rock and a hard place. He's trying to do what all Ukrainian leaders eventually end up doing, which is trying to appease the ultra-nationalists and the real, these are the real, when people talk about extremists, neo-fascist, right, well, it's in Ukraine, you will actually find it. But anyway, he's been trying to appease those people. That means that he's drifted further and further away from his electoral base. The electoral base is turning against him. He senses that there's this void opening up underneath him because, of course, he can never really win the support of the right. The nationalists in Ukraine will never really trust him. So he's turning to an increasingly repressive policies in Ukraine itself, even as the situation there continues to deteriorate, which is what it is doing. And that is a very dangerous situation because you have a very weak, unstable leader wildly out of his depth, uncertain what to do. He had a very, very disappointing meeting with Biden in August, apparently. He came away very disappointed with what Biden said to him, and he only came away with $60 million, which really wasn't what he was looking for. So he's looking increasingly isolated, increasingly desperate, and increasingly weak. And in a place like Ukraine, that's a dangerous combination of things.
Yeah, all the cool names are taken. Says that Obrador is a liberal conservative, with the flag of Mexico next to that comment. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, that is interesting, actually.
That is interesting, yes.
That's a very interesting thing, yeah.
Alexander, I wanted to actually ask about your thoughts on Melbourne, Victoria, and Australia. There were a lot of questions in the beginning of the live stream about what's happening in Australia. Why are they taking this route? And as we predicted, as we talked about in the video that we did on Melbourne, we said that it's just going to get a lot worse before it starts to get better. Their response to everything, the government's response, was going to be to ramp up the tyranny and the surveillance and the authoritarianism. And that's exactly what they're doing, it seems.
Well, exactly. And, I'm going to say straightforwardly, I'm puzzled about this because I had a conception of Australia, which is shared by, I think, many British people. There's a very liberal, libertarian sort of place. I never expected to see this in Australia of all places, and why the leadership in Australia is taking it in these directions, which I would have thought would be electorally fatal ultimately, by the way. I'm not really sure, but I'm starting to wonder whether rather than pursuing policies against the pandemic, this is some other kind of agenda, and whether it really is all about control. My initial view was that they were over-influenced by what China had done. Australian and Chinese contacts had actually become quite close for a time, but I'm starting to wonder about that also. So I'm baffled by it. I find it very difficult to understand, but it's been taken to such extremes that, of course, it's now provoking a reaction, and that reaction is going to grow. But the response of the authorities when they're faced with that kind of thing always and invariably is not to retreat, but to actually intensify what they're doing, because they've now gone so far that if they start to pull back, that will call into question the entire logic of what they were doing from the outset, at which point they themselves, the people who made all these decisions, are going to find themselves in an impossible position politically. So I'm afraid Australia looks to me on a path of escalation, and that's how it's going to end, what is going to happen, what the breaking point is going to be. I don't really know, because I never thought it would get to this point in the first place.
Yeah, Command Unit says, any info about Navalny's time at Yale, the CIA swamp?
There is so much rumor, discussion, talk about this. I mean, if you ask people in Russia, they will tell you that he wasn't just recruited there, but the reason he went there was because he'd already been recruited. I don't know. I mean, this is a thing I've got to say. I mean, I can make some guesses, but they are pure guesses. I mean, I don't think that people who are invited to Yale, who are able to get to Yale, do so by chance. I mean, that's an absurd idea. He was obviously, spotted and picked and brought to the United States, and they did so in the knowledge that he had certain views, and he was an ambitious person, somebody that they could work with. But what actually happened to him whilst he was there, I don't know. I'm going to give you, rather than talk about Navalny, I'm going to speak about one particular case I do know where something perhaps not dissimilar happened. And that was that I happened to become acquainted with a Georgian, a student from Georgia with similar political views to Navalny, who got admitted to a very, very well-known and prestigious legal institution, law training institution in Britain, where he was trained as a lawyer. And I remember meeting him, and there was somebody with him all the time who was previously from the British Foreign Office. People told previously, but I have my doubts about that. She looked very much like his minder to me. And what was very strange was that he was passing all his exams, even though he barely spoke English. I mean, it's most strange. I mean, somebody who barely spoke English was passing very, very tough legal exams, which British students were failing. That didn't make much sense. So it did suggest to me that, he'd been recruited in some form and was being trained and prepared in some way to go back to his country and play a big political role there. And I suspect that was what happened with Navalny too.
All right. Let's wrap it up. Kinky says, I subbed at 6,000. So happy to watch this great channel grow. Wow, that's incredible. 6,000. Thank you very much for subscribing. Check your subscription as well, because we know that YouTube unsubscribes people all the time. And they also take out their notification setting as well. But, that's part of the game. Look for us on Locals, everybody, as well, the Duran.locals.com. Locals is blowing up. It really is. We've got a lot of different content there as well. So definitely plug into the Duran.locals.com. Talking about Locals, Alexander, let's just pull out some more comments from Locals. and we'll start to wrap it up. Siren says, yes, Alexander, the Chinese are studying history and are not going to fall into the same trap as Japan did. The Chinese will handle the Evergrande collapse. That is the big story, Evergrande. Yeah.
I think they will handle it. I think that they are perfectly. I mean, I think to some extent they brought it about themselves. I think they were worried about the property bubble. They were worried about Evergrande itself, and they wanted to bring the whole thing to a stop because they thought this whole thing was spiraling out of control. And let's be straightforward about this. That's what proper economic managers do. I thought Paul Volcker would have done if he'd been in charge of the Federal Reserve. He wouldn't have allowed stock market and property bubbles to get out of control in the ways that happens in the US. So what the Chinese do is, in a way, conventional economic management. But of course, it's conventional economic management with Chinese characteristics. Nothing happens in Japan, I'm afraid, in China, I'm afraid, without some degree of politics and geopolitics playing a role.
Yeah. And Cosmic Rain is in the house moderating. Thank you very much, Cosmic Rain. I just saw you with the blue wrench as well, helping out to moderate. And very quickly, Alexander, Jeff Rich says, this is a good comment. I feel things might be turning a bit in Australia, especially as hardline Victoria-Melbourne approach has failed relative to the New South Wales Sydney approach. We'll post some things to locals in the next few days. That's awesome, Jeff. Definitely post
very
it.
Welcome. Thank you very much. And can I stress again, I don't always have the time because I've been under a lot of time pressure recently. There's been a bereavement in my family I've had to cope with, but I do stay on top of things that people post on locals. I mean, it's something I really value when people make those contributions, and I speak for Alex too. He values them. We're very well aware of what our community does.
I'm on locals all the time. Yeah.
All the time. And, we're really grateful to what's happening. Once I get over this particular series of issues, then which it should do, then I should be fully engaged like Alex is too.
Yeah, Evgeny says that, Alexander, Ivy Leagues have been recruiting students from Hong Kong, as well as the U.S. government can use to destabilize China and to overthrow the ruling party.
Well, I agree. And I agree. I mean, I think the other thing is partly the intention is to create a kind of political elite in these countries, which will be imbued with American, Western, neoliberal values, and who will take over and run those countries. Except it never quite works. At least I think that, to say it straightforwardly, in the case of Navalny, and I suspect in the case of these people from China, degrees from Yale are not really a good preparation for running Russia. It's the country is so profoundly different.
Didn't they try that with Afghanistan when they took a professor, Ghani, to run Afghanistan?
Exactly.
It didn't work out well.
It didn't work out well because, as I said, these are profoundly different countries, and that's not actually the right training if you want to run or make big moves in a country like that. And China, I would have thought, is an other layer of difficulty and complexity on top of that as well.
Yeah. All right. Let's wrap it up. Chris Banks says, the only locals I go to is for a quick pint. On that note, that is a good way to wrap it up. For those that do want to go for a quick pint, Carol says, thank you for a fascinating live stream. Thank you, Carol, very much. She also says, locals is great. Jeff Rich says, many thanks. And let's see, so many good and interesting reads that I find it hard to keep up with all the other reading that I do. That is what Godspeed says with regards to locals in all our platforms. Let's give a shout out as well to ODYSEE and Rumble and BitChute and SuperU, all great platforms, and definitely check us out there. And of course on YouTube, where we are always posting as well and doing live streams on YouTube, to check us out wherever you feel comfortable. We try to post to as many places and reach as many people as we can. Cosmic Rain, thank you very much for moderating. David Williams, good to have you here. Alexander, any final thoughts as we sign off for today? And I remind everybody, Friday.
The end, absolutely. We'll be doing our proper full live then. And thank you again. And as I said, this is. I mean, it's 2021. it's going to be a really important year. All the tectonic plates are moving. And as I said, I do think it is the end of globalization, or at least the beginning of the end of globalization. I think we can definitely see now that the project that was launched way back in the 1980s, perhaps even before 70s, if you like, has now failed, and it's failing now disastrously. Some people, however, will not give up, and of course they will continue to do what they can to keep it alive and to make it succeed, and they will become increasingly frenetic as they try to do that. But as I said, to my mind, it's literally now you can start to see the end.
All right. And Alan Watson jumped into the house as well. Alan, good to have you here. Oh, the gas shortage. Just a lot of people asking about the gas. We actually have a video on that as well, Alexander. But I don't know if you want to say one quick minute before we start, if you have time.
Well, very quickly. I mean, there's the gas shortages in Britain, which we've done a detailed video about, and I'm very cynical about this. I think it's partly been orchestrated by the oil companies for all kinds of private reasons. But there are gas shortages. There's energy shortages across the world. I personally think that the ultimate cause of these is the reckless fiscal and monetary policies which have been followed over the last year, especially over the last couple of months by the United States government, especially after the new administration came in. They thought they would turbocharge the economy. What they've actually done is they've unleashed a worldwide inflation, which is now affecting the energy markets and which is creating massive price spikes and energy shortages across the world. And I'm not going to deny that there are some politics in all of this. I mean, people say, for example, that you're talking about natural gas shortages in Europe. It's partly because the Russians aren't rushing to provide more gas on the spot markets. But why should they? I mean, I'm not saying they are, by the way. I mean, I don't know, but I mean, it's very interesting how people talk about this. They take it as somehow that the Russians have a duty not just to supply Europe with the gas volumes that the Europeans have contracted for. Nobody says that the Russians are not fulfilling their contracts. They seem to regard it, they seem to argue that the Russians have some kind of moral or some sort of obligation to supply Europe with gas over and above the amounts of gas that they're contracted to supply. That is very weird. I mean, the level of self-entitlement is really quite extraordinary. And, if that is a relationship that you want, if you say to yourself, well, we need gas from Russia, well, just take a step back. You've closed down your nuclear power stations. You've closed down your coal stations. You don't like oil because oil isn't, produces lots of carbon problems. You built lots of windmills, but windmills, unfortunately, the wind isn't always there for them. Solar power in Northern Europe isn't terribly good because it gets cloudy. So you rely on gas because gas has less of a carbon footprint. And at the same time, you spend 20 years abusing, sanctioning, criticizing, demonizing your major gas supplier, and then you're really surprised, you're shocked that gas supplier doesn't come along and provide you with more gas over and above your contracted volumes. I mean, I do find this all very odd, actually, and I think if we take a step back and look beyond all this purple prose that we see in some of the European media about all of this, it really does beg some questions about the colossal sense of entitlement that some people in Europe seem to have. I think all of these problems will be resolved. And by the way, I think that the likelihood is that after the winter, energy prices across the world are going to fall and fall sharply. That's a complicated topic, very complicated topic, and one we will need to do in a much longer video.
Yeah. Rules for thee and not for me. 2021 is the year of the 200-year period of Aquarius. I'm just reading the last comments from locals. And do you think the world is going to have some kind of Earth Federation in the next century?
Oh, no, I don't think so. Not myself. Can't really imagine it. But then who knows? And as for the age of Aquarius, well, thank you, because I've often been wondering. I mean, I remember that way back in the 70s, there was even a program on British television called The Age of Aquarius, which used to, it was quite a good program actually. And they used to discuss all sorts of current things, and they used to tell us about the coming age of Aquarius. And nobody ever gave me a clear understanding at that point of when that age was supposed to begin. And I understand that we are now on the brink of it. So that's
here.
It's here. There we go. The water carrier. So there we are.
It's here, and we are going to sign out. Thank you very much, Alexander. Thank you to everyone that joined us for this impromptu, just kind of spur of the moment live stream. It was really good to connect with everybody again. Thank you, Cosmic Rain, Alan Watson, for jumping in and helping to moderate. Thank you to everyone that sent us questions in the live stream, super chats, and everyone on Locals as well. It was great to touch base with everybody, and we'll see you on Friday. Alexander, have a great day. Oh, here's one super chat that just came in from Flying Boar, and we are going to put a hard stop, Flying Boar, after this question that you just sent us, which is the new Chancellor-elect of Germany said Russia should continue to send gas through Ukraine. What will Russia do?
Well, I think they'll pay no attention to what the European Chancellor said. But again, I come back to this. Why should Russia be obliged to send gas through Ukraine if it doesn't want to? Why should Russia subsidize the Ukrainian economy if it doesn't want to? Again, I think some people need to take a step back and, think this through rather carefully. Forcing a country to trade with another country if it doesn't want to seems a very odd thing. And it again speaks of the enormous arrogance of the European powers and their sense of entitlement. They want, if they're so bothered about the fact that Ukraine is going to lose its $3 billion a year of transit fees from Russia, and or the money that it makes from Russia through gas transit, which is very simple. All the Europeans need to do is pay the Ukrainians more money. They can do that. It will all disappear into Swiss bank accounts and places of the British Virgin Islands and all the rest. But if that's their concern, they should do it. Not ask for the Russians to do it all the time. I don't think Russians are going to pay any attention. I don't think this really means anything.
Cosmic Rain, you said you sent the super chat before. I'm not seeing it, so I don't know if you want to just put your question very quickly in the chat, because I don't see it on the list of super chat. We'll wait for a little bit if you want to put it in there.
Yeah,
because I don't see it. I'm going through the list, and I just don't see that question or that comment. So just let me know if you can put it in the live stream chat. We'll take a breather for a few seconds. Hello to Kurt in Switzerland. How you doing, Kurt? Good to have you here with us. An interesting moment of silence.
An interesting moment of silence. Well, silence is sometimes golden, but as I say, seriously, we are looking at lots going on in the world, and that's not surprising that it should be so. But given the enormous ambition of the project,
okay, great. That's a perfect way to end the stream, Cosmic Rain. I just said sorry, I arrived late, but you know how it is with YT. Keep up the good work, lads. Cosmic Rain, you have closed out the live stream. Take care, everybody.
And we'll be seeing you all again on Friday, we hope.